Hello. Thanks for meeting me here. My head's been a bit cloudy lately and I needed some fresh scenery. Welcome to my channel to anyone who is new, and welcome back to returning subscribers. Today, we're going to talk about another niche topic that I've given an unhealthy amount of thought to. Loners. This is a video I've wanted to make for a while, ever since I considered making this YouTube channel. The reason I find the hidden world of loners to be fascinating is because I would consider myself to be part of it. Sure, I do have a few friends, but I rarely hang out with them outside of Discord. And since I'm very introverted anyways, I rarely find myself in situations to meet new people. This may sound like a huge code for my social anxiety, but honestly, it happens that everything I love doing, such as writing, drawing, and watching movies, are done in solitude. So although admittedly I'm not a complete loner, I feel as though because I'm so immersed in loner culture, it effectively makes me one. But besides my personal relation with the topic of loners, I also feel like there is very little serious conversation surrounding them. Sure, there are many loner types of characters depicted in the media, but there aren't nearly enough that are really thoughtful. Beyond being the bland supporting cast member that occasionally gives witty quips, or an over-the-top trope of the misunderstood genius pariah, I feel like media depictions rarely ever break beyond the archetype to examine the complexities of real loners. And sure, if you're adventurous enough, you could even find some conversations here online. Even some here on YouTube, though the problem is that many of these conversations vary in constructiveness, some even actively harmful to loners in our image. So that brings me to the mission I have today. By the end of this video, I hope to provide a product that works both as a glance into our inner world for non-loners, while also providing a thoughtful video for loners to feel heard. Though before we get into the deeper stuff, let's start on the surface by defining what a loner is.
Other news, can you remember the last time you spoke to your next door neighbors? No? Well, you're definitely not alone. 3/4 of people surveyed by a lottery company say
This may seem like an obvious question. Loners are simply people who have very little close relationships outside of their family, though I would say there are different types of loners. 4 distinct types which any loner may find themselves relating to. Those types are the gloomy loner, the Machiavellian loner, the eccentric loner, and the loner by circumstance. Let's start with the gloomy loners. As the title suggests, gloomy loners are people who isolate themselves due to emotional turmoil. These are people who may deep inside long for close relationships, but because of reasons varying from low self-esteem, misanthropy, apathy, and many other reasons which may stand independently or overlap and compound upon each other, those needs for closeness are drowned by an emotional storm. Next, the Machiavellian loner is someone who simply does not interact with others unless they need something from them. Though this can sometimes be motivated by social anxiety, these loners are usually just people who believe they have a much more interesting conversation with their inner monologue than they would with another person. This type may seem similar to the gloomy loner in the sense that they seem aloof or cynical, but instead of carrying a mask of boredom to cloak their emotional storm, Machiavellian loners are genuinely apathetic. Third is the eccentric loner. Eccentric loners are people who find themselves alone because they are unable to assimilate to the dominant culture and often hold beliefs or habits which make them seem alien to others. Whether they prefer to be alone or not, eccentric loners march to the beat of their own drum, and because they can't or won't get on the same rhythm as others, they find themselves being social outcasts. Lastly, we have the loner by circumstance. These loners may be introverts who simply spend a lot of time playing video games, or extroverts who live in rural areas and rarely run into people to and from work. What makes these loners different from the others is that they're just regular, everyday people with normal levels of neuroticism and socialization. Though just like the previous loners, the reasons for why these people isolate themselves are complicated. It would take forever to compile a list of all the variables and map out how they interact, though one variable off the top of my head is certainly the lack of pro-social infrastructure in their society. For example, the lack of third places in their town, living in car-dependent cities, or being a product of a culture where you don't talk to strangers or know your neighbors.
Other news, can you remember the last time you spoke to your next door neighbors? No? Well, you're definitely not alone. 3/4 of people surveyed by a lottery company say at best they just know their neighbors in passing, and several couldn't even name a single person on their block. And most of us are fine with not knowing the people who live next door. More than half say they're not at all interested in getting to know them any better.
These profit-minded, atomized social environments don't even feel like they were built by humans, or like aliens who want to keep their livestock lethargic and obedient. Honestly, it's no secret why many people are becoming loners, why they are choosing to fulfill their needs for spontaneity in life and social interaction through art and parasocial relationships. There's no incentive to touch grass when you live in a concrete jungle, filled with lifeless architecture and littered with high-speed hunks of metal. Though I'll stop this tangent here. If you'd like a more in-depth look into this issue, I suggest watching the YouTube channel Not Just Bikes. Though for now, let's get back to the topic at hand. Please remember, these are just summaries of these groups of people, influenced by my personal experience. Individual loners may have their own complex, unique reasons and struggles not mentioned. Also, an individual may not find themselves relating to one of these types completely, and may very likely find themselves relating to 2 or more of these types. If I were to mark these types on a Venn diagram, I would be somewhere near the center. I typically don't talk to others unless I need something. I find myself being an outcast because of my values and personality. There's very few community places to meet new people in my town, and even if I were to have access to those places, I find that I isolate myself because I don't want to spread my anxiety and depression onto others. In a way, I feel like the avatar of loners, because I'm able to empathize and relate to all of them. Though as the avatar, I feel like it's given me some perspective on the inner world of loners, which may not seem so pleasant. This realization that I've had is something that puts my entire lifestyle into question, and is a message I want to drive home as we get to the end of this video. But before sharing this realization, please let me explain how it occurred to me. I'm sure you don't want to hear my boring old story, but I promise it'll come full circle.
There's nothing healthy about being a complete shut-in. I see it for myself, it's terrible. Even though I do go out, I do spend a lot of time as that shut-in character.
Yeah. I mean, I do think on the other hand, there's a bit of a prejudice about being a loner. I think mainstream society is more geared towards extroverts, in that being an introvert and not going out socializing and not going out to a Super Bowl party is seen as being, I don't know, failing at life. I think that I don't agree with, but if you completely, I don't know, go to some cave and don't have any kind of interaction with people, most of us are gonna suffer, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We're social creatures, and there's no way of getting around that.
So it was just another slow, quiet night alone in my dorm. It was at the tail end of fall, and the sun set earlier in the afternoon. This is the time when the gloom of autumn is at its most serene, as the dead bare trees are shocked back to life and sing a chorus when shaken by the incoming winter breeze. Though as the seasons change, the routine of the loner is forever stagnant. Like every day before then, and the following, I spent the whole day attending classes, studying, and making time to eat in between until the late afternoon. After attending my final drowsy class and spending the last few hours before dusk working on upcoming assignments, I would cap off the day with my nightly ritual. I would start first by washing up in the bathroom, and leaving the tea kettle on for when I got back. By the time I finished showering and brushing my teeth, the tea would be the perfect temperature. Finally, I'd enjoy my tea and watch a movie or anime until 9. Not to be prudent, but just so I had enough energy to drag myself out of bed the next morning. This may sound like a very sad way to spend a college experience. I mean, in high school I fantasized about the novel experiences famous to college living, going to interesting local shops, meeting people from different countries, learning new things about myself, and being surrounded by people with similar ambitions were all possible experiences, hopes, playing in my younger self's head on repeat. But along with those hopes, there was also a despair that was very apparent in those fantasies. That despair being that the person having these experiences in my head looked and acted nothing like me. The false self that I created in my head, who was open to new experiences and sociable, was the exact opposite of the neurotic recluse which I truly was. And it's not like I was the optimistic type when I was in high school. If anything, I was more morose than I am now. Simply, those silly hopes were being fueled by others, not just by our society, which, through our culture and media, depicts college as a magical place where you find your life's purpose, but also by the people in my personal life. Specifically, the person who fed the most into these hopes was the school counselor. He used to tell me all the time that high school didn't matter and that college would give me a blank slate, a new start. I truly believed him, and those hopes would only crescendo as I got closer to my very first day in August. With a new roommate, new lifestyle, new environment, new clothes, new everything, the situation seemed perfect to become something new. Something more than the ghost that disappeared at lunchtime and reappeared at math class. Something more than the kid who only said hello and thank you. Though as you could expect, things didn't go as planned. For those of an average high school experience, you could expect the transition to college to feel like a new adventure. Like all the growth you've done had led you up to this point, and it's time to take your life to the next level. Though for the loner, who is forever trapped in the past, it's naive to think that they would just catch up to speed and that the experiences that molded them into the person they are today would suddenly dissolve when they stepped on campus. Now, halfway through my college experience, those hopes are no longer entertained, as well as the despair that fed from them, leaving me alone with the neurotic recluse I've always known and over time come to love. Again, whether it's a new season or new challenge, the routine of the loner is forever stagnant. Realize, I say this not just to whine about how the life I lead is not a unique one and could have been predetermined from the first domino to the last, or to be honest as a loner and confess that realizing I may never have those novel experiences brings me sadness. Though yes, those are both true. Besides that, something important I want you to notice is the mindset that I've developed as a product of this experience. I've become accustomed to being alone, even happy with it, so it didn't devastate me to have those ideas crushed. The hope of having new experiences and the despair that I would have to change myself to realize them left me unshaken, because I know, like every time before, when hope and despair left me, I had the same neurotic recluse which I had come to love. I'm sure it would be just as difficult if I didn't love the recluse, if I deeply craved these experiences, and was erased of my pride of being an outcast, but I'm sure that would come with its own obstacles. Anyways, I've become happy to be alone, whether as a defense mechanism or not, so there's no real urgency to change my life. Even if I'm not spending my free time playing beer pong in the lounge, or making new friends in clubs, I'm satisfied with my loner life and my humble nighttime rituals. If this dilemma isn't clear enough, here's an analogy. Imagine this. You're lost in the woods at night and found a place to stay in an abandoned car. Sure, it's restrictive and cramped in here, but it's definitely warmer and safer in here compared to the dark, ominous woods. Though you think to yourself, I don't want to stay in this cramped car forever. I should find better shelter, perhaps I might find a cabin, or even better, a road. Even though you know there are better options than waiting in the dusty car, you may find yourself staying anyways. You've likely thought of excuses already, such as, it might rain, you might find a bear, or maybe even nothing. Why risk leaving the warm car where you can nap until morning and dance with much worse possibilities out there? Surely someone will save you, right? This is the dilemma of the loner. Why risk awkward introductions, rejection, or humiliation when you're comfortable right where you are? Though back to the story, as I've said, it was an average day, but what was unique about this day was that I had much more free time since it was getting close to Thanksgiving break. During that free time, since I would never do my nighttime ritual early, I spent the day in between my usual daytime routine going on Reddit. I know I alluded to before that I didn't like Reddit, but I wasn't on there reading threads by armchair experts. I was using the site as I usually do, as a form of people watching. Although you can find the worst people on the planet on Reddit, you could also find the most interesting people on the planet there too. Reddit is a great place for people watching, because the anonymity makes people comfortable with pouring their hearts out. Ironically, behind the veil of a screen, the people who would usually pass off as NPCs in public become more human. Niche subreddits in particular make it easy to find the weirdest of the weird. So the subreddit that I was stalking that week was called r/loner. r/loner is, as they self-describe, a home for the loners of Reddit. As you may expect, it's not a very active community, and belongs to roughly 3.5 thousand users. Though I would say exploring the subreddit was for the purpose of people watching. Truthfully, I also wanted to gain some sort of catharsis and validation from others who may share my experience. At this point, I was firmly secure in my identity as a loner, but for some reason I had the urge to find people who relate to me. Along my loner expedition, I found many different posts which I found somewhat relatable. Something that I've noticed about the community is that the identity of being a loner is taken with pride. You'll either encounter posts like this, which describe how they simply prefer to be alone.
Does anyone else not really feel the need to be in a relationship?
My biggest grievance is how they feel the need to view you as subhuman just because you don't have anyone in your life. The arrogance is astounding. It's like being alone is a death sentence for most people, and they project that onto the few lucky individuals who find solace in their own company. It pisses me off. I'm a loser just because I'm not in a relationship, yet they're the ones going through so much. Heartbreak, loss, etc. All that's better than being alone, I guess.
And others like this post which claim a certain freedom in being alone.
I have come to realize that I'm more comfortable being a loner than being in a relationship. Now this may be sudden, I am only 21 after all, but I was laying in my bed 2 nights ago listening to a bad moon rising, and it hit me that I feel at peace being alone/loner. It doesn't bother me.
Being a loner is freedom. I truly believe that the ability to go prolonged periods without social connection or interaction is one of the best abilities a human can have. There are so many intricacies in social interactions that affect your day-to-day life that most people aren't fully aware of. How attractive your face is, how tall you are, your race or ethnicity, your socioeconomic status, the way you dress and how you present yourself, your sex, the way you talk, etc. With any social group, there will inevitably be a social hierarchy present, with these things playing a factor in how people interact with you and perceive you. These things affect your position in the hierarchy. I just don't like having to put up with the games people play. Now I don't have to watch what I say so I don't offend others. People are sensitive to brutal honesty. I don't have to keep track of XYZ and whatever mainstream bullshit everyone else follows so I can have conversations. Can't be too quiet and aloof. I don't have to be worried about expressing a dissenting opinion. The whole group will gang up on you and potentially outcast you. I don't feel pressured to talk. Again, can't be too quiet. I don't have to feel pressured into doing things I don't want to do. The list goes on. Enjoying my own company frees me from all the bullshit that people put up with because they don't want to be lonely. I acknowledge social lives can be fulfilling, but they're not this perfect sunshine thing that people criticize loners for not having.
Though between the positive posts and relatable memes, you'll also see many that are more morose.
I feel so lonely, like no one even cares about my existence. I have so-called friends, but I feel disconnected from everyone. I feel left out and I'm desperate and keep looking for it like a pathetic loser. I can't focus on myself and move on, and whenever I see the people I know living their best life while I'm rotting here, it makes me want to KMS.
I didn't want to be a loner. I nearly made friends throughout my life, but it never got to the point of actual friendship. I didn't have friends as a kid. I said it would be better through elementary, high school, college, post-college, well into my adulthood, and it never did. It never will. I didn't want it to be this way, but I have long accepted and have gotten used to it.
For every bold and proud proclamation of pariahdom, there are one or two who express that they aren't loners by choice. Those who lament the poor deck they were dealt and how poorly they played it. If you explore the comments in these posts, you'll mostly see empathetic and supportive responses, words of solidarity with the struggle of being an outcast. I found the support in the community to be quite wholesome. But what caught my attention more were the comments of disdain.
I want to disappear. I can never tell the one I like, and no one can ever love me or like me, so I'll be an FN hopeless person for an eternity. I am crying and life feels so terrible right now. I am literally not doing fine at college either, so F everything.
This subreddit is for people who enjoy being alone.
At first, I thought these people were just jerks. They must feel that because they were able to take the cards they were dealt with pride, that the others should just get over it. Though after some thought, I don't think these comments come from a place of contempt, but from fear. Fear that dissenters to the lifestyle of being a loner will cause their facade of contentment to crumble. Fear that just one idea from someone else may contradict their own and cause a fleet of their own insecure thoughts, causing them to trip back down to their previous state of despair. When I found these comments, the focus of my loner expedition had shifted. I went from reading comments of those who shared my prideful statements to those who were more bitter and raw. Bitterness was an emotion I had felt for a while, and only then did I start to process it once I observed it in others. What I've noticed is that whenever I'm alone, I feel completely comfortable. As I said before, most of the things that I enjoy, that give my life meaning, take place in solitude. When I'm in my element, tucked snug in my room, it feels like I have everything I could ever need. Though, when I inevitably have to leave and I'm forced to encounter something outside of my element, like seeing a playful couple at the train station or a group of laughing friends at a restaurant, those are the only times when I feel incomplete. These moments fill me with bitterness. Partially from the knowledge, or perception, that society views me with disgust for being a loner, and also that the things that bring my life meaning are not enough. Diving into the hidden world of loners was meant to validate my identity, to hear the voices of others who would echo my opinions back to me, but instead it ended up being the catalyst to questioning my identity's integrity. This brings me to that realization I mentioned earlier. That being, you can't take true pride in being a loner if you had no choice to be one. You can't claim to be a willing participant in walking this path if you have no other paths to turn down in the present and no opportunities for new paths in the future. Though I do think that a lot of these people do find enjoyment in solitude, just as I do, but I don't necessarily buy that these people are satisfied being alone, at least all the time. Before I bring this video home with a final message and call to action, I want to take a trip back to where the loner was born. Back to the quiet kid.
You said before that you have avoidance personality disorder. Can you maybe tell me about this?
Basically, in my whole life, I always avoided a lot of stuff. I always tried to avoid school as much as possible without really a good reason. It's just like your mind just keeps telling you to avoid, and it's something you can't really control. A lot of times when I went to school, when I was on a bus or something, and it stopped at the bus stop where I was supposed to get out of the bus, I just sit there, I just couldn't get up.
I'm sure many of us remember our self-isolating behavior emerging sometime in our school years. The formative years where our emotions are at their highest and our self-esteem is at its lowest. The years where our brain is at its most plastic, making it easier for us to learn new skills or new vices. The years that will ask us to make decisions and investments which could bite us tomorrow or decades in the future. With just how stressful these times were, it's no wonder why the quiet kid was so anxious. Or perhaps the worries consuming them are a bit closer down the road. Fears of rejection, humiliation, or awkward introductions. I bet these thoughts swarmed and tormented the quiet kid. I bet those worries of judgment and failure would only get more potent as they got closer to the first day of school. Or maybe they were completely fine the night before, and the weight of their situation only hit them in the morning. On the bus ride to school, or at the student orientation. The terror of being in a new place, around new people, learning new everything. As you could expect, spending their time stewing in their anxiety left little time for engaging with their classmates. Classmates who in turn would read this gloomy behavior as a disinterest in socializing. This moment would mark the beginning of the despair cycle for the quiet kid. They feel tense because they are scared and alone. This causes their body language to appear guarded and sorrowful, making them unapproachable. A reaction from their peers causes them to become more anxious, exhibit more tense body language, and repeat the cycle ad nauseum, with each circuit compounding upon each other, sending the quiet kid further and further into hopelessness. Though, the quiet kid, not yet mature, would read the situation differently. From their perspective, they are simply being passively ignored or intentionally excluded. They assumed they were going to do poorly socializing with others, they were neglected by their classmates, and now, what was before a dreadful what if, had been affirmed. On the third day, though the nerves of the quiet kid would settle, they would still find themselves in isolation. It seems like everyone has already found their clique, making it even harder to make new connections. Now, where anxiety was once the dominant emotion haunting the quiet kid, is now bitterness. Bitterness, which would cause new thoughts to appear such as, I'm just different from the others, or there must be something wrong with me, or them, which, as you can guess, only caused the quiet kid to retreat more. At this stage, they're no longer apprehensive of social interaction, but instead actively repelling or avoiding it. A week goes by, and they're still in the same predicament. Though what's different now is that the reigning emotion has shifted from bitterness to apathy. From this day forward, every day will seem the same. Every moment from school field trips, sporting events, and parties, no matter how bland or sweet, will merge together forming a muddy brown soup like melted Neapolitan ice cream. The despair of realizing you will barely remember some of the most important years of your life will surely bite them later, but for now, they believe it's all meaningless. Once the quiet kid hits the apathy stage, there's little hope of steering them in a different direction. Unless this cycle is broken quickly and harshly, this habit can very well follow them into adulthood, which in our atomized society, where nobody knows their neighbors, is a game over for the quiet kid.
Half of U.S. adults experience measurable loneliness, and it's greater among young adults. The cure, Dr. Murthy says, is not only personal change, but societal change as well.
What we need to do is actually rebuild social infrastructure in our country.
You're talking about changing the social fabric. That's been decades in the making.
It's been decades in the making, but it's also something that I'm confident that we can address if we put our mind to it and if we act together.
This brings me to the last part of the video where I share my opinion on how we combat this problem. Though before I share, I must admit I'm not promising any miracles. I think I've made it clear through the course of this video that I'm very much a depressive realist, so I'm under no delusion that anyone could just free themselves out of a despair cycle. There are many people I've seen online who try to sell a silver bullet. Soulless grifters that say if you just hold these values, buy these items, and have this health routine, everything will fall into place. I don't believe this advice comes from a complete place of malice. In fact, I believe there's a certain kernel of truth or more in these pieces of advice. Though ultimately, I think this individualistic, idealistic mindset that you can just will yourself out of despair will only send loners deeper into despair when they inevitably fail, either by failing to meet the criteria, failing to see tangible results, or failing to find hope even after following the steps to success perfectly. NEETdom isn't an issue you can just pull yourself out of by your own bootstraps. These habits are self-sustaining and all-consuming. That's why I believe we should take a community-based approach to this issue, which includes the simultaneous support of society, peers, and loners. First, let's begin with society. I sprinkled in my opinion throughout this video, but I'll put it plainly here. Simply, our home should be built not for profit, but for people. Sure, building another highway and a couple more roads will generate profit, but the returns will only diminish as maintenance for these horror shows will only become more expensive. Pro-human infrastructure such as space for businesses, third places, apartments, and parks will not only make communities more likely to step outside and mingle, I'm sure the profit and taxes generated by businesses will be more fruitful. Again, I strongly suggest watching Not Just Bikes to learn more. Secondly, let's discuss the role of peers. If someone seems like they're too gloomy to be bothered, please don't just pass them by. I suggest starting off by just saying hello to them at least 3 times a week. They may not respond, but I promise you they'll appreciate it. They will remember the day you took the time to acknowledge them for the rest of their life. Just acknowledging that they're not a ghost will have a significant effect on their self-esteem and contradict some of those bitter thoughts we talked about earlier. After a few weeks of saying hello, have a short conversation, ask if they saw a movie over the weekend, or what hobbies they're into. I'm certain you'll get a one-word answer at first, but if you persevere, they'll get the impression that you genuinely care about what they have to say, and start giving longer answers and asking you questions in return. This may seem like a chore, but I promise it's worth your while. You could possibly save someone's future from imploding on themselves or exploding on others, and if you're lucky, you can meet your best friend for life. Lastly, let's talk about what I think us loners should do. Well, I ask the peers around us to not treat us like a fly on the wall, and for society not to exaggerate our isolation. I need you to be more open to them as well. Thinking back to my high school days, before it really did feel like every day was the same. Though now, looking back as a more mature person, I realized that I wasn't neglected by others, but that I was simply not open when they threw me the ball. I remember how a kid I thought was cool tried to talk to me, or when people sat at my lunch table and I pretended to be invisible. Now, I'm not telling you have to throw on a lame fake smile and change your personality. Like I said before, there's nothing wrong with taking comfort and pride in being a loner, as long as you can confidently say that you always have the choice to be something else. And part of that means being open to catching the ball if a cool person passes you and wants to become your friend. To be honest, I haven't quite mastered this yet, and I'm still working on having less offensive body language. So just know, when you're out there putting on your best face, there are millions of other loners, including myself, who are in the same fight with you. This is something better learned when you're younger, so if you're in high school or middle school right now, curbing self-destructive habits now will save you from a much harder battle in the future. Yes, it's great to be alone, to watch good movies, play good games, read good books, but it would be refreshing to occasionally receive a text from a friend who wants to meet at a local cafe. Thanks for watching this video to the end, and I hope you got something valuable out of it. At first, this video was just going to be about the epidemic of loneliness, but I feel like there's already so much content looking at this issue from an analytical standpoint. It got a bit personal at times, but my hope is that this emotional video will have a bigger impact on you, no matter how few of you see this video. See you next time.